Great. If we hadn't prepped before, I'd say it's amazing to get to see you online. I'm so
Oh my
surprised.
goodness, wow.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, I'm sure there's a bunch of people hopping online or seeing that we're going live, so we'll kind of give them a quick second to join us here. But otherwise, for everybody that is online, welcome to this iLindy conversation with the ever so fabulous, the brilliant, and the wildly generous Gray Armstrong. So my name is Jo Hofberg. I am calling in from Seattle. Gray, where are you calling in from today?
Denver, Colorado.
Denver. Okay, so we're both stateside today. How very, very fun.
Yeah.
So recently on Facebook, a number of you certainly saw that Gray had an article and iLindy had the pleasure of hosting it. And that is what we are here to talk about today. So let me get into like the officialness of this all. So Gray recently released the first of a 7, possibly 8-part series about Lindy Hop and Blackness. And so this is the first paragraph of the article because there was absolutely no way that I was going to be able to say this any bit better. So the quote from Gray's article: "This series is for dancers around the world who have questions about racism in the community, how it shows up, and how it affects the Black members of the community. Most importantly, it's here to prompt thoughtfulness and give ideas on how this community can be more respectful and welcoming to the people this heritage and legacy belongs to. This is for people who want guidance on how to extend that to outside the dance community." So, Gray, I'm super excited about this series, and I'm so honored that iLindy gets to be a part of this, a part of building into a new future that is possible through a new set of possibilities with a new lens, with new guidance. And I'm just so excited that, that we have gotten to be in conversation around this topic and many others. And now, like a year later, maybe 2 years later, we are here now talking live on the internet as if, we were just like hanging out in our respective apartments. So great. Before we get going, because there might be some people who don't know who you are, can I have you introduce yourself so we know how to best honor you, your identity, and some of the many accolades that you have under your belt?
Accolades, wow. My name is Gray Armstrong. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio originally, and I am now living in Denver, Colorado. I am a dancer who's been dancing for several years at this point. Started with Lindy Hop and have mostly existed in the blues world for the last 7 or 8 years, and we'll talk a little bit about why. And other than that, I currently write a blog called Obsidian Tea that talks about Blackness and blues primarily. And then I was contacted by the lovely Jo and iLindy to have a discussion about what is happening in the Lindy Hop scene in terms of race and what we can do about that. And I want to be clear so that this is not a mistake, that people don't forget this, is that I am one member of a long lineage of people doing this work, and particularly in the Lindy Hop scene. So this is not something that I'm starting. This is just something that I'm bringing my perspective to. And the only reason that's possible is in part because of so many other Black voices and people who've done this work, in addition to Black Lives Matter being a thing that has brought this issue in the community more towards the white members of the community's forefront or knowledge or awareness. So I just wanted to point that out too as well, is like I am writing about this from one perspective, and I do try to include other perspectives throughout the series, but I am just one guy writing. So
Okay, so to be clear, Gray, you are not speaking for everybody who looks like you. Is that right?
no, I know, right? It's
Good.
surprising.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure that was really, really clear that that's not what you were saying. And as I know that is a question that sometimes comes up, or a set of assumptions that show up in conversations.
it is definitely. And
Yeah.
no, I am not. And I make that clear in the piece and then a couple times throughout the series. But I mostly just wanted to say that now that that is, I am one person in a legacy of people doing this work. I am not the only one. So, yeah.
Yeah. Great. I'm noticing my energy levels, and I feel like really jacked up and really excited. And I'm trying to just remember to like be calm about this. And I'm really excited because every time that I've gotten to have a phone call with you regarding really any of the stuff that we've spoken about over the last year, I've always left with a sense of like hope and excitement that there's something really good in our future.
Mm.
Like we, like the community at large. And so like I already can tell, because I think almost all of my interactions with you have been that way. My body's already like, ooh, you're gonna feel really happy about this conversation afterwards. But I also know that it's a heavy topic we're going to get into today. So I'm trying to remember to like calm down, but I'm so grateful that you have made the time to have this conversation, and
Mm.
that you still have energy to have this conversation with the community, because this is not the first time that a conversation like this has happened or needed to happen. Am I like kind of
Yeah.
on point there? Am I off base there? Like, what would you say to that?
I would say you're correct. Honestly, I kind of like the contrast of you being very excited and me being very zen.
Is that
And it's not because I'm not anxious. I'm very anxious. This is how I look most of the time. Which is why I do okay in blues, because that's a part of the vibe. It's all a facade.
it's all
It's
aside.
all a facade. In terms of having energy for the conversation, honestly, the reason I started my blog was because as an instructor, I had all this extra information and this stuff I wanted to talk about, um, but I didn't have a great place to put it. So I created a website for it. And then I started noticing that there were people who had questions or like repeated questions. And a lot of my Black peers or people who are just in the community would say things like, I'm tired of answering this. I wish we would move beyond this. I wish we could get past this. Um, and so it ended up being, well, I've got a lot of patience for this kind of thing. I'm a firm believer in education as being a big factor in the conversations around race and what to do and how to deal with it. Um, and so I was like, well, why don't I just write it? That way, if I get this question again, I can just say, well, it's on the blog. You should read the blog. And if other Black folk who don't have the energy or desire, because sometimes that's it, to continue to have these conversations, they also don't need to do it. That they can also just forward a message of like, here, just read this. Like
Mm,
it's not my job to educate you. And so I've kind of taken on uh, the job of educating people because
mm.
I find the information fascinating, although it can be heavy. Um, but generally, I I look at the hope for the future in the grief in the past, if that makes sense.
Mm. Great. Very quickly before we continue, can you share what your blog is so people who are not as familiar with your work that they know where to find you?
Yes. The blog is called obsidiant.com. Um,
Hmm.
it's currently a little bit under construction. I'm about to go through a website shift, but the posts are still there. You still can read them. They're still being updated. It's just that it's a little. It's going to be much better sooner. So be on the lookout for some quality of life changes. Let's say. But
Oh,
yes, that's the blog, Obsidian T.
okay. So Gray, as you just said that you've now been writing about this for a while on your blog, Obsidian Tea, and and now you've done a piece on iLindy. There's obviously a bunch of time that happened between when you first decided to start writing there versus the article that you have now written and is published on iLindy. What are some of the big changes that you've noticed over that time span? And this can be answered towards like what you've done with your dancing and how that's impacted, or just like what you've noticed in the community at large. Very open-ended.
So I would say I mentioned earlier in my intro that I'm primarily a blues dancer these days. And I had started to come back tentatively to the swing scene right before the pandemic started. So we know how that went, um, unfortunately. And the reason I left Lindy Hop was because I was feeling um, overwhelmed by issues in race in the scene. And I felt like I could not exist in the space in a way that I wanted to. So I left. I left the dance that I started with. I left the dance that I loved because I felt so uncomfortable. And then I switched primarily over to blues, to the point that a lot of people don't realize that I know Lindy Hop, and on the
Mhm.
occasions that we've danced, because they think about me as the blues instructor, and they're like, "Oh, you're pretty good." I'm like, "Yes, I
Yes,
wanted to
I
teach
am.
this. I wanted to teach this too." Um, but here we are. So, um, I think that is one of the big things that changed is like over time, I started to actually see progress in the Lindy Hop's scene's willingness to actually address race as a problem. Um,
Mm,
Whereas the blue scene, although there are issues in terms of addressing race and that whole aspect of it, um, was just much farther along. And I did not want to fight multiple battles in the Lindy Hop scene. Uh,
yeah.
and because there's just layers to it,
Mm,
which will come up in the series, of course. And so when it hit that BLM came back into the white community's consciousness in early 2020 was when I suddenly was aware that, oh, there's movement here now in a
mm,
way that there wasn't before. And I knew that there was movement and that it was meaningful because old articles that had been written up in the blue scene started recirculating
hmm,
through the Lindy Hop scene. And
mm,
people reacted very differently to them this time, about 3 years later. And one of those articles was mine. Um,
mm,
I don't know if you saw this, but an article by Ellie, Why People Should Stop Blues Dancing, went around. And then I created a follow up article um, about a different perspective of what Ellie was talking about and what we can do with that information that she gave us so graciously. Um, and then to see that show up in the Lindy Hop scene again, like 3 years later, and people were like, "Have you seen this?" And I'm like,
where you been?
"We
Where
already
you been,
talked
Mel?
about this." And then people were like, "Wow, this is really good advice, and you really called me out in this moment, and I thought about this, and this came up, and I'm sitting here and I'm watching, and I'm like, this is going over much better than the first time because I read the comments that happened the first time, um, and the scene was not very nice to me." Let's just say it that way. It was not very nice. Um, but that was why I knew that there was suddenly momentum and there could be something done. And then,
Mm,
of course, some organizations started up, like Move Together and Collective Voices for Change. Hello Black Lindy Hop had been really pushing for some things anyway. Uh, and I had been going back and forth about if I wanted to address the Lindy Hop community, um, because I feel like I have a very gentle way of educating people that can be a great fit for some folks. Um, Although gentle but firm, like I'm not, being a pushover either. And I had a lot of questions about the Lindy Hop scene of like, how did we get here? How did we get to the point that I was chased out of the Lindy Hop scene? And I know that I'm not the only Black person to have had that experience.
mm,
And I was curious about it. And so when I was approached by you all um, to consider writing about it, it's like, okay, there really is a lot of momentum. There really is some changes. People are looking for guidance on how to do this, on how to talk about it, on how to have these hard conversations with their peers. And I have some feelings. So I was like, yes, I would love to talk about it. I would love to write
Yeah.
about it and put out there how I'm feeling. Um, but I also did not want it to end up being a a series all about me and my feelings and my griefs. Um, it could have been.
I get
And
it. This is what like therapists and coaches are for, where you're like, okay, I got to work on me, but collectively, how do we have this conversation?
exactly. So that's why in the first and last piece, particularly, I highlight other voices of the African diaspora,
Mm,
people who have been primarily in the swing scene more recently than I have.
mm,
And there's a wide range of ages, genders, experiences, all kinds of things. And people kind of talk about their experiences. And so I wanted to highlight that also so that people couldn't necessarily be like, oh, this one guy is complaining about the scene. And it's like, no, 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 it's not just me. It's not just me. There's a bigger problem. There's a lot of
yeah,
us saying these things.
yeah. Great. I have so many questions and comments and thoughts about all of the things that you said, and I'm like, do not interrupt. Just like take it all in. So in case it seems like I'm not engaged, a mile a minute over here. My very first question is when you mentioned that the conversation in the blues community is different than the conversation in the Lindy Hop community.
Mm.
Why do you think that is?
I think there's a lot of different things about it. I think
Yeah.
one of the options is leadership. It's like in our scene. Ooh, that's spicy. I don't know if I want to go there. In our scene, one of our main leaders is, for instance, Damon Stone, who is a black
And
man.
who is Damon Stone for people who are unfamiliar with the blues community?
Damon Stone is a dancer who's been dancing since ever, but in swing and blues, since I think about the 70s or 80s, he
Mhm.
grew up in dancing both of those styles and a couple other styles. Um, but he is one of the like foremost respected professionals in the blues scene.
Mhm.
So he's a major factor in how the scene shapes,
Mhm.
uh, in addition to a lot of other people, of course. But having his leadership, I think, is an important factor.
Mhm.
Whereas I feel like, and this is the spicy thought that I'm going to tone down slightly, um, there were black leaders I've been told and I've learned about in the swing scene, but in general, there's not like a major set of voices that I feel like are listened to as well as we hear out Damon. So there's people
Mm.
and they're saying things, but it's not being integrated.
Mm.
Versus in the swing scene, I feel like the voice that is the most integrated is a um, particular vision of Frankie. And I think that matters. Uh,
Mhm.
so that's part of it. I also think part of it is that the blues scene had a kind of they had to redefine themselves, uh,
Mm.
which we can get into that whole history about blues and fusion and Lindy Hop and where the blues scene came from. And that all matters. So there became a point where people had to choose if they were going to uh, continue dancing to whatever music and however felt well to them,
Mhm.
or if they were going to acknowledge the Black lineage. And those
Mm.
two things kind of split into two different scenes, essentially, uh,
Mm.
where you have the fusion scene or uh, what is it, Cascadian freestyle? I love that name. Um, it's so
I
good.
think I think that's how I think about myself if I fall off a skateboard. Cascading freestyle. So
As long as it's stylish, that's what matters. Uh, um, but then at the same on the other side, we've got, the blues scene, which started looking at, well, maybe we should be playing black artists. Maybe we should learn more about Black culture. Maybe we need to acknowledge the dances that go with this music. And then at some point, well, maybe we should have Black leadership. Maybe we should be hiring Black people. And it kind of naturally progressed in this way. Whereas I
Mm,
feel like Lindy Hop, in some ways, has been up until now so focused on preserving a vision
mm,
of the
mm,
scene and what it means to be a Lindy Hopper, um, that there wasn't as much space to create a new scene or a new vision of what it could look like.
mm. I think that's really important to be able to sit with and just really take that in. So Gray, what I'm hearing, just to make sure I've understood correctly, there is Black leadership. There's certainly more Black leadership in the blues community. And at some point, the community reckon with its identity and its roots. And there was a splitting of the scene, but that now means that there is a scene that is rooted in its culture and
Mhm.
is present to that in building the community as it goes forward.
Yes, I would say it's not quite rooted yet, but it is moving towards that, I would say.
Mm.
Um, and I wouldn't necessarily say there's more Black leadership, but that the Black leadership we have is more respected. Um,
You hear that, Lindy Hop community? Okay.
I was like, I don't know if I want to say this, but
Yeah.
also,
Well, no. I mean, like, right,
not.
like
I
this
think
is like this is
people
always a part of a conversation, which is like who is at the top? Like who are the movers and shakers and the quality of work that they're putting out? Is it also supported by the next tier of movers and shakers and educators and organizers? And like as that cascades downwards, like how are these messages at the top being supported, or how is there space for new messages to come up so that the scene continues to be balanced by not one voice but by many voices, so that it's a community effort instead of an oligarchy? But also just to make sure that like if like this is where representation matters,
Mhm.
and to make sure that there are multiple voices at the top that are being respected, that are being supported. But also, like, let's even just take into a case of like selfishly, like me, like, are there enough women? Like as I identify as a woman, is there enough leadership through women, with women, for women, supporting other women coming up? Like, can there be like all weekends that are designed to, I don't know, highlight support? Feel like I'm going to take this off into the weeds, but basically, like, is there, like, can women be considered for leadership roles where that's done without a second thought? Because it's like, yeah, of course, women can lead. So, like, that's something that's very easy for me to go, oh, I do understand this issue from that perspective because of the identities I hold. I'm
Mhm.
hoping that somebody else who holds similar identities that I do also understand how that can be extrapolated out.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that is most important is not just representation, but also being being willing to listen to that representation and then
Mm,
support that representation even when it conflicts with previous beliefs. So, for instance, like I am not a woman. I have not been one for a very long time. Um, and so I see it as yes, there should be support for women in like leadership positions, but also on like the flip side, there should be support for queer women, and there should be support. Like if you're going to go intersectional, you need to go in intersectional at levels of like, well, if you have the option of a black queer woman or a cis heterosexual white woman, whose opinions on what matter more? Like you start getting into that nuance, and
mm,
uh, I think that's one of the things to consider. And then also,
mm,
there's a bit of a cultural mismatch in terms of women in our culture tend to be the more outspoken leadership, the powerful ones. Um,
Great.
whereas,
Just to confirm, when you say our culture,
uh,
uh,
I'm specifically saying for Black Americans in
Okay,
my
just double checking versus
yeah.
like Lindy Hop culture versus
Oh,
like
no,
us
no, no,
in our
no.
shared room. Just wanting to make sure that when people hear you say culture, they know specifically what culture you're speaking about.
Yes. I'm talking about Black American culture, specifically descendants of the enslaved in this culture, in this country, um, which is the USA. And in my opinion, like it is more culturally common for women to be in leadership positions, to be the most powerful person in the room. Whether they hold a title or not is not really the point. Um, and so one of the things that I have that comes up is like, are we also hearing from Black men? Are we also hearing from Black non-binary people? Are we addressing some of the needs and concerns that are specific to those other sections also? Because, like, for instance, the objectification I feel now is significantly worse and different um, than before. Before, I was mostly ignored, which in and of itself is a problem. And now I'm treated as um, more like an object of like sexual desires for people to put onto me, which makes me
Mm.
very uncomfortable. For those who don't know me, I'm a trans man. So I lived previously as a woman and now I am not because I wasn't very good at it. If we're fully honest, I wasn't very good at it. And so I let it go. I was a really bad actor. Um, and so here we are. So I happen to have experience with the scene in a lot of different ways from a lot of different angles.
Yeah.
But that is a thing that if you do not talk to Black men and you do not talk to them about their experience, it's not going to come up from a Black woman because it's a different, like, intersectional experience, which is why I think it's important to diversify who you're listening to. And one of the suggestions I make in one of my Obsidian T posts is if you're not sure who to listen to, if you have two minorities conflicting about a thing, who has more to lose?
Mm.
That's the person you listen to.
Mm.
So if you run into somebody that's Black and homophobic and you run into somebody that's Black and queer and it's a Black queer issue, who has more to lose here?
Super straightforward. Well,
But
sorry, it should be super straightforward.
that's the thing is I have gotten those messages before of people being like, well, I don't know. I feel like I'm not allowed to conflict with this opinion because they're a minority. And I'm like, great, but this other person is a minority of minorities. Like they are even farther down the totem pole of power. Um, and so it's their life that gets affected, not the homophobic Black person's life. And that's why you have to have, in my opinion, it's best to have as many intersections as possible because, like, being a white cis woman is very different than being a non-binary mixed race person.
Mm.
And although those are both still minorities, they're very different minorities with very different problems.
Mm.
And it can be a great way to see the blind spots that you might not know were there, as long as you're willing to accept that those are really blind spots and not something that's being made up.
Mm. Yeah, there's definitely there are so many challenges that everybody is dealing with day to day that I think it's very easy to flatten the experience to just quickly move by something, whether it's just like, oh, we've already done it this way before, we know it works, we'll just keep it, instead of going, I am listening and I'm taking the time to hear that what we have works for a number of people, but not everybody. And we actually want our dance to be more inclusive, or we want our scene to be more inclusive, or we want to make sure that this is more accessible. And if we listen to our community members about what it takes for somebody to feel safe, this requires more work and we need to pay attention and we need to do something differently, which is going to require money, energy, and heart. And how do we make sure that we have some of that because we value these other particular members, or we value this outside opinion that will create for a better experience for everybody involved, not just a couple of people. So we're not doing this as a service for a couple of people. It's because everybody will actually benefit from this kind of care, consideration, and to say, we see you and we care about your experience. And we know that everybody wins when more people are seen.
Exactly. One thing I tell people is an analogy I've come up with as it's about driving. And when you're driving, you run into some people that are aggressive drivers, and they'll say, "I'm a great driver," and
Yeah.
you're like, "You didn't see that you almost got into several accidents."
Mhm.
And they'll go, "But I'm a great driver. I've never gotten into an accident." And so I've decided to point out, well, you haven't gotten into an accident because everyone around you is a defensive driver. So what work are you shifting onto everyone else to support your idea that you are a good driver and that you can do and get away with whatever you want to?
Mm.
And the analogy for this situation is, if you are a majority member, whether that be um, white or cis or whatever, pick a thing. Um, you know, are you that aggressive driver who's just driving down the road, not paying attention, and everyone else is having to get out of your way
Mm.
and being impacted, and you're not noticing because, wow, it's just working out. And so you need to start looking at what people are doing around you to support your comfort and your ease, because
Hmm.
that work has to come from somewhere. It's gotta. Like, if it's not coming from you, somewhere it's coming from. The other analogy is, like, if, for instance, like, towards the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of people were like, "Oh, I'm just gonna order groceries." And I would go, "Oh, that's nice of you." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And I'm like, "Well, well, you're at home safe. That means that, like, somebody has to go and get them. Like, somebody's going out to do that for you."
Yeah.
And people will be like, "I didn't really think of that." I'm like, "Yeah, every time you do something that makes your life easier, there's more than likely a brown person behind it, like, making that thing work, that I'm not saying you shouldn't have ordered delivery of groceries, but it is something you should think about." Uh, or I've had people be like, "I'm gonna go out of town. I'm gonna go to the tropics," like, earlier in the pandemic in particular,
Mm.
and then calling me and being like, "I feel like there's something I'm missing here, like, this is not a good idea." And I was like, "Well, have you considered that, like, everybody who serves you is probably gonna be brown? The people who clean your room, the people who make your food, the people that play like, clean the plane, do all these things, and then they're gonna go home to a family. And although you are at low risk, they're not." And my friend goes, "Oh, I didn't think about that." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm not surprised." But, like, that is an aspect that, like, he was just thinking, I can't be here anymore. I wanna go on vacation," but wasn't thinking about all the people who make your vacation possible.
Mm.
And so I think that is an important way of considering, uh, what where that effort is coming from in the
Mm.
Lindy Hop scene of, like, if it's working for you, why? And where is the work going that it's not working for other people?
Mm.
Um, and then additionally, like, are you gonna continue to be the aggressive driver who just drives through town willy-nilly? Or are
Yeah.
you gonna maybe consider that maybe making people swerve out of your way isn't the nicest thing you could do? Maybe you can
It's not as considerate.
maybe you could take 2 more minutes to get to where you need to be, and that is an effort on your part, and it does, like, inconvenience you slightly, but it may mean that somebody doesn't, hit a wall because of that, uh,
Mm.
or get afraid for their safety or what have you because of that.
Mm. Great. You're always so eloquent. I absolutely love this. I'm going to throw this out there. So, for any of the European listeners, if you don't drive regularly, that was a great analogy. So, well, you're welcome to contact me privately and I'll come up with something else, maybe involving trams or bicycles or something. So, so great. I was like, the first time I read the article, I remember like just really needing to like take a step back and take a couple of deep breaths. And I remember just feeling really ashamed that the community would have participated in other people feeling this way. And I'm very much projecting. Like, if somebody gave me feedback later, like, Joe, you said something and this really hurt somebody, I would be mortified. And I would be I would be mortified, and I would be grateful that I got the feedback, because then I could actually make a difference, but I would have been completely mortified. And so reading that, I kind of had that same shame around the community of like, oh my God, I don't want to believe that the community would do something like that. But I also am aware enough to know, like, no, those were actually people's experiences. Those were shared in confidence with you, that those that were allowed to be published, that those were their experiences. And I imagine that that was just a few experiences, that you did not get the entire laundry list of everybody's experience. So that was something that like really stuck with me. And further near the end of the article, you had asked some questions, and I just wanted to like share this with the readers in case you have not read this. We'll put links in the chats, or links to these things so that you can read the article. But basically, Gray, you had set up a scenario of, do we want these kids, as in our next generation of dancers coming up, do we want these kids to grow into adult dancers and end up feeling like the older Black dancers do? Can you imagine telling your grandparents or your parents the hurt that they feel at the hands of your friend was all in their head? Or can you imagine telling your kids or your siblings that it's okay for them to be ignored or get the door slammed in their face for going out dancing? When they ask for help, you say that it's not that big of a deal, or that fun is more important than helping them. Like, when you proposed all of that, it just like really encapsulated of like, if I ever personally got that feedback that I had done those behaviors, and this is what I was and I got to be faced with the reality of my actions, with a reflection of my actions. I mean, it just like, it still pierces me reading about it. And oh my God, for the love of God, I hope I wasn't involved in any one of those. And this is one of the, like, I assume that every person who's read this has thought back and gone, was that me? Could that have been me? I hope to God that wasn't me. I'm sure that wasn't me. But I don't remember every single interaction I had. When was I maybe careless because I was in a hurry to go have fun, or because I wasn't thinking about this? And so I was like busy, just overly consumed with needing to get to work on time, which is why I was speeding around in my car. Or even though it would have only been 1 extra minute of generosity, I didn't spare the time because of whatever. Or I just didn't know to be aware of other people's emotions because I was having such a crappy week, and I just was like stomping around angry, and that could have been a time where I maybe inadvertently hurt someone. I mean, like, there's lots of things that could have happened, but I mean, this was definitely like my experience reading it. If I was embarrassed for the community, I was like mildly mortified myself of like, God, have I taken part in any of this? Recognizing that I can't change the behavior of the past, but I can absolutely be mindful about how I am existing going forward in the community, and understanding that, like, if a story like that ever got back to me of like, Joe, this was somebody's experience with you, how it would be devastating. And since, not only just because I would like to be a good person, but I also very much would like to not be that kind of person, there's lots of reasons about why it feels like I have the time, the energy, and the patience to do some deeper digging about how is it that I'm engaging with some of the community members that maybe have not had the care or the welcomeness that maybe others have felt. Like, what is it that I could do to make a difference? Because sometimes one person can make a difference, just as one person can sometimes make a whole situation so less fun. So sorry, So great. Like that was just like a lot about me, but I was just thinking like, oh my God, I have so many feelings about the article, and we
Mhm.
don't have anybody that I'm aware of right now who's on the line who's like, I'm going to call in and do this. Like maybe we'll set it up and we'll take calls from the audience. But that was, so that was like some of my like big messy reflections, and it's messy because feelings can be messy about this. But how I wanted to bring some of this back to you was, how how was it for you to go to contact people and ask for these experiences?
I think I think one of the things that white community members don't know or seem to understand is like we all talk about this. None of these particular stories were because I did not take names of people.
Yep.
Some people offered, but I did not accept names like intentionally.
Mhm.
Uh, there wasn't a story there that I went, "Oh, I can't believe that happened." All of the stories, I was like, "Yeah, yeah, that tracks. That sounds about right." Uh,
Mm,
there was not one that I hadn't run into some variation of before, either myself or with close friends,
yeah.
or um, like for instance, even the getting the door slammed in your face one. I had that happen to me, and I was trying to go to a West Coast swing dance. I was I was very sick at the time, not um, like I have chronic pain, so I was in a lot of pain. Not that I was like ill. Um,
Mhm.
Let me in the dance. No. But I was just very like tender feeling and sore, and so I was wearing some like sweats, um, and I decided that, oh, I want to get up and I want to go dance, and there's a dancing thing like 2 blocks from where I was staying. So I go, and this was West Coast swing, but I go, and I'm greeted, and they go, "Oh, are you a member here?" And I say, "No, I know that this place has, like, non-member pricing, it's a little bit more, but, like, I'm just curious how much it is so I can go back and get my cash and come back." And they go, "No, you have to be a member." And I'm like, "Wait, I've been here before. I've run events here. What are you talking about?" And so we get into this back and forth, and I look over and I see through the doors, there's a friend of mine who's Black, and she's at the DJ table, and she's like, I think she saw me. And so I was like, this is weird. And
Mm,
so we go back and forth, and the guy's like, "Yeah, if you want to become a member, you have to pay $100 tonight, and then you can become a member, and then you can come in, and then you can pay the fee to come in." And I was like, "Well, I don't have that money right now. I just want the non-member pricing."
yeah.
So we go round and round and round, and there was something about like there was something about him being surprised I was interested in going, and he didn't think it was really gonna be my scene, and that whole vibe, and so eventually I leave, and I go back where I was staying, and then I get online, like, "Hey, this venue, did something change? Did something change, or am I missing something?" And my friend happened to be online, the one who was at the DJ booth, and she goes, "I saw you, and I was wondering why you didn't come in and you left." And I was like, "Oh, this is why I left." And she was like, "That is not a thing." She's like, "That's not a thing. Like, we have an issue with race in our community, and I cannot believe they treated you that way. Like, this is something I've been speaking out about, and, you should come back." And I was like, "I'm not coming back."
Yeah.
And this has been years ago, and I will go to that venue, but I have not gone back to that dance. Uh,
Mm,
it just I have my dignity. I have my dignity,
yeah.
and so I won't go back, and this is me being, like, in some sweatpants and a shirt, and, like, I'm not very tall, I'm not, like, quote, unquote, "threatening," I'm very, like, soft-spoken and quiet, um and I can't imagine someone who's not that vision of um, black nerdy, therefore harmless, um, having an interaction with this person. it probably would have been worse. And so it's like if I get that kind of response, then
Mm,
everybody gets that response.
mm,
So
mm.
part of why I wrote those questions at the end
Yeah.
was to highlight there's a bit of an issue sometimes where people see the Black members of the community as separate.
Mm,
We're like not the community. We're the Black members of the community.
mm,
But we are your friends and we are your family and we are, um, some of us age wise could be your aunts and your uncles and your grandparents. And so if you talk about the Lindy Hop scene being your family, that includes us and that includes our feelings and experiences. And so sometimes it's easier to kind of break through that dissonance of like, oh, that's other people's problems,
mm,
to bring it back to, yeah, if you got to witness that happening to me, what would you do?
mm.
Because there were witnesses. Like people stood around and watched. It wasn't just like me in the sky. Like people watched and then I left and then I cried and that was my night. Uh,
Mm.
and so it's one of those things of like, what would you do? Would you be willing to be uncomfortable to support me being allowed to be at the dance, to just go dancing, to have as much fun as you get to have?
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
Gray, what I love what you just said is like, we are your family. We are part of your family. If this is considered, your dance family, that you are a part of it, that the Black community is a part of that. So obviously this is to the white Lindy Hop members. And to have that be stated. And I'm hoping everybody who listens to this, if they're still listening, if they've made it this far in, to
So
like to yeah to take a moment and think about like, who do you consider your Lindy Hop family? um as you stated in the article, like, if you know when you read these stories, how do you feel about them? How do you feel about them now after BLM like it made a splash in the white community 2 years ago? I like, that's a broad brushstroke, so I apologize. I know that there's far more nuance to it, but let's just say about 2 years ago, like BLM came within the white purview of issues that they need to focus on, understand, and do something about. So like, you know how does this change? Because I think, Gray, you wrote this, because I must have read this, what, maybe 6 months ago, 8 months ago, a year ago. When did you first write this?
I think this piece in particular was done in like August, this first one, and
Yeah.
then everything else kind of got condensed into a shorter time frame because I was very ill again for a while. Uh,
Right.
for those who weren't privy to that, this was a series that was going to come out closer to um, right after 2020, 2021, sometime in there. But then I felt really ill and I was struggling with my health. And so this kind of went on the back burner. But so this first piece was done several months before the rest of it. So I think it was like August,
I
somewhere
think
around there.
so. I am just reflecting, like, having like being a part of, and like, for lack of a better term, and like without nuance, like part of the Great White Awakening, like having my eyes really open to that. And like, it's so fucking embarrassing to say that I like wasn't great. I'm totally a part of the problem. Like, I was really, really unaware. And because of that, like, I know I caused harm because of a lack of knowledge, like a complete and utter unawareness, lack of awareness on like how to be a decent person and how to have my eyes open for this. Like, when there were sexual assault issues in the community, I
Mhm.
understood I understood what was going on. I had a macro sense about, okay, so these are the moving parts and these are some of the challenges. As a woman myself, I have had issues surrounding this because like, I think most of the women I know have had some kind of issue with this. So like, that was easier for me to wrap my head around. But like, when the Great White Awakening happened, I was just like, okay, holy shit. Like I have so much more learning to do, but I already had foundational work about like, okay, this is going to be challenging because there's a lot of people who are not going to want to engage with this. Like it was fine before, we don't have an issue. Well, if you didn't do this, then that wouldn't have happened. Are you sure that happened? Like they're always really nice to us. That wasn't a problem. And like I could recognize that like all of those same statements to disregard the truth that would otherwise require somebody to engage more deeply and then have like taken action after that, all of that was going to be the exact same thing that was going to show up, which is if you actually listen to the people who are putting their name on the line, who are, sharing this moment of like injurious behavior by others with the community to say, this is real, this is happening, and it's happening behind closed doors. And if we don't talk about it, if we don't name it, this now means a lot of people have to live this continuously, or they finally just fade away because they don't want to be in an environment where they're not honored or supported or protected. So I certainly had the foundation set for like, sorry, my foundation was set by that of like, well, that was an uphill battle. And I kind of knew what that looked like. So if I use the same lens of, if you just listen to somebody else when they say, this is a problem, what could I expedite? How could I expedite my learning curve? Because there was still going to be so much I wasn't going to be able to wrap my head around as quickly because it's not my lived experience. But to know that it's like, well, everybody is safer in a world where women are safe. So what if we like pulled that one out further? Everybody is safer in a world where the LGBT community is safe. Everybody is safer in a world where Black LGBTQ members are visible and are seen and are honored and respected. When that community has access to respect and dignity and care, probably everybody else does as well. So it's like, this doesn't seem like this needs to be more complicated than there's a lack of care. Sorry, and this is like wildly simplifying it, but there's a lack of care and a sense of community, just as you said, from like, we are part of your community. And if you saw us this way, would you not act differently? Would you not, speak to us differently? Would you not engage with us differently? Would you not extend, your, like the joy to us as well? And like, and this is still from like a very teeny tiny, like little window of like 2 years of like reading books and like listening to podcasts and joining various groups so that I can like try to wrap my head around some bigger issues that are like so obvious that they're hidden in plain sight. But yet all of this information is here. And I find it really annoying, even that I said earlier, like I was shocked to read this, but not surprised because of everything else that I had read. And I'm sure that there's a more eloquent way to put that, but I'm hoping that probably some of the other like listeners with white identities have a similar like understanding. Like you could be surprised, like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening to people in the Lindy Hop scene I know versus somebody on the news that I don't know. But to also then go, but I'm not surprised because I have been listening. I am aware that there are issues and that not everybody in the community is treated with the same level of respect and dignity.
I think, well, there definitely will be some people that are surprised for sure. I know because I interact with them.
Fair.
One thing that a friend of mine asked me, I think a few years ago, why I put so much emotional labor into things like this. And one of the things is that I know, so my primary like education is in communication. And I studied group and interpersonal communication specifically, and what makes things effective and what doesn't make things effective, and a lot of other things. And people struggle with high level concepts that don't affect them. Versus if here's one of my favorite stories. I'm at Focus. I'm at Lindy Focus. It's my first Focus. I don't know very many people. And I'm sitting at the bar. And there's, for those people who have not gone, there's a bar inside the hotel where people get food and drinks in between going to dances and things. And I'm sitting there, and this is, I don't know, this was around the start of BLM the first time.
Mm.
So it was on the news, which was also playing. And I'm sitting next to this gentleman, this white guy, and I don't remember how we got into a conversation, but we start talking, and we're talking, and he's in the military, and da da da. Da, and he's like, I don't understand this. Oh, it was during the Kaepernick thing, um, because he goes, I just think it's disrespectful for him to be kneeling during the national anthem, and he kind of gets on a high horse, and I'm like, well, I've got time. I've got time today. Like, let's go. Let's play this game. And sometimes I love a good um, seeing if I can make someone see something from a new perspective as
Mhm.
a game, just through conversation. And so he starts talking, and we kind of go back and forth. And you know, I reveal like, oh, I'm from Ohio, and I'm from small town Ohio, so conservative part of the country. Like I understand some of this, some of what you're
Mm.
talking about. And he's like, yeah, I just don't think we have a race problem in this country. I don't know what anybody's talking about, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, well, can I tell you a story? And he says, sure, sure. So I tell him about how recently I had went to a store and that I got ignored like the whole time I was there, uh, except to be followed about an aisle or two over as I go through the store. There's just somebody like behind me the whole time, but no one will talk to me. No one will make eye contact. Uh, and then I left and I cried because I needed something, and it was just one of those days where some days you have more capacity for that type of nonsense, and some days you don't. Uh, and he's like, "What? You? This happened to you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I know. Me, the like." this the like quiet, clearly introverted, and he was like, but you don't seem like a problem, you don't seem like
I was like, how was he going to follow up that sentence? Okay.
I don't remember exactly. It was borderline.
Cringe.
Yeah, he was trying, but
Yeah.
I knew what I was getting into. um but basically he goes, you don't seem like somebody I would be worried about. Uh, and I'm like, yeah, I know, but this happens to me all the time. This is not a one-time thing. He's like, what? And I was like, no, no, no. This is my 75% of the time I go shopping. This is my experience. And he's like, that's not okay. And he's starting to get like worked up for me. And I'm like, okay. Yeah.
Thanks, buddy.
I was like, yeah, I know it's inappropriate. And he's like, that's not okay. You should get service. Like people should what? And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I think I'm a nice person, but and it's just the life. And we're like sitting and we keep talking, and I'm like, I've got him. And
But yeah.
so, because now he's invested. It's not a theory of, oh, it's this guy who's kneeling for no reason that I don't know. It's, oh, this nice person that just sat next to me gets ignored in the stores and can't
Mm.
get any service. And so I've been trying to get a drink this whole time we've been talking and getting overlooked. And so I mentioned to him, and I'm like, hey, can you do me a favor? And he's like, yeah, sure, whatever. Like, I'm gonna get you a drink because you like have been great about talking about this and blah blah blah. And I was like, yeah. Well, here's the thing. Um, I've been being ignored for the last 40 minutes. And I need you to be the white person in this scenario where you're gonna get his attention so I can get a drink. And he goes, what? And I was like, oh, you haven't noticed? And he's like, no. And I'm like, okay. So we sit, and I'm like, well, give it. He's like, no, no, no. He's just been busy. He's just been busy. Like it's not because of you. It's not because of race. He's been busy. Yeah, he'll be by. So we wait a little while, and he walks past, and I'm like gesturing. I'm doing all the things, uh, short of because in here in America, like snapping or like clapping in the direction of your server is inappropriate. So
Mhm.
short of doing that, I'm all the gestures. I'm like leaning, I'm reaching, I'm like, hello.
A little bit of
Uh,
disco.
Yeah, and there's nobody at this, like, everyone has gotten served and left at this point. So it's mostly just us. And he just keeps going back and forth. And so eventually, the gentleman I'm sitting next to is getting antsy, and he's getting more and more upset. And he's like getting to the point where he's questioning if I'm right. And if he decides to gesture, will he get the bartender's attention? And so he's like, this is ridiculous. And he reaches out, and within about 3 seconds, hello, sir, may I help you? And the look on this man's face as he looks at him and looks at me, and I'm just like, and he's like, my friend has been trying to get your attention for the last 20 minutes. Can you please take his order? And after he did, and he left and drops it off, he's like, how often does this happen to you? And I'm like, often enough that I know to ask you to do it. And we interacted a few more times throughout Lindy Focus. And I don't recall his name off the top of my head. But to me, I see there's a lot of power in using yourself as an anchor for people to understand that we're people. We're just like you. Which, on one hand seems like it's very like lofty and strange to think about it that way, or to like have to say it. But it is kind of like it's very removed. People don't think about it being like, oh, that person you just insulted or did not pay attention to is my aunt. It's not just that Black person over there. That's like my cousin, or even if they're not related to me, they are the age of my niece, and I see you acting with them. I know how you would act with my niece. And so using that familial tie can sometimes bring it back down to earth and out of people's like thinking about it as a political thing, or thinking about it as, the way they want to believe the world to be. It's kind of hard to look me in the eye and be like, yeah, trans people are X. And then I'm standing next to you like, hello, how are you? It's real hard to do both. It's not impossible, but it is difficult. It's
Yeah.
much more difficult than when you don't know people.
Yeah.
And then you can other them.
Other them.
Yeah.
Wow. Gray. I'm so sorry about that. But it sounds like, it's a common enough experience that it's not your first rodeo, where you also just have a sense of like, if I am going to be here, I need to know how to roll with this. Otherwise, I need to not be around.
So here's the thing that some white people tend to not think about it this way. These aren't extraordinary experiences. These are everyday experiences. I don't know any different. It's always been this way. So it's not so much like, it's upsetting, yes. But that's a Tuesday. Like that's not unusual. That's my typical service. So when I get good service, which to a white person's experience may be average service, oh, look at that. Someone said hello to me when I came in. Like it's a perspective difference.
Yeah.
So when people say things like, "Oh, I'm so sorry that happened," it's like, well, that is most of my life. Like to me, that's the average. That's the baseline. Being greeted is the baseline. So when I am greeted, it's special. When I'm not greeted, it's average. It's still upsetting, but it's average.
Gray, I realized I was being incredibly lazy with my English, as you pointed that out, which I'm really grateful that you did, which is like, I'm sorry to hear that happened, but I'm also like upset to hear that happened.
Mhm.
as well as recognizing that I know that things like this happen. I know that these are common interactions. I've now spent enough time listening to understand, like, this is not an isolated experience. The one that you've just shared, it's not that you're the only Black man that is experiencing this, that this is a much more common experience than I think a lot of the other people that hold white cisgendered identities like want to admit, because if it's happening regularly, then it's also like, okay, well, it's probably happening regularly by people who probably hold identities that are closer to mine. Because I mean, well, actually, is that assumption fair? I assume that people that hold your identity or similar identities are doing that far less often than somebody
Oh,
who
yeah.
holds an identity like mine.
Yes. And it comes back to that concept of where that labor is coming from in some
Mm,
ways, because for example, I often will tell people and like, look, this isn't a random bad white person that has done these things. That's your uncle. Like, and as much as the person I'm looking at that's being mistreated could be my aunt, the person that is doing it also could be related to you, and you
mm,
don't get to witness that, or your avoidance of awkward family conversations means that sometime that guy at Focus is your uncle that I get to talk to.
yeah.
And so either you can do that work or I
Yeah.
can do that work,
Right.
and y'all have a lot of uncles.
Yeah.
You you know, and so it is more often people that are more disparately away from each other because it's easier to other people that way,
Yeah.
uh, than it is once you're closer. And there's intersectional issues that are too nuanced for this conversation,
Yep.
uh, but overall, yes, that does tend to be true. But I think that's the thing that I see commonly in the more progressive or aware parts of not just the Lindy Hop scene, but the blues scene is this assumption of, oh, well, I don't have people like that in my life. You do.
You do.
You do.
You just don't experience it.
You don't experience it, or you don't acknowledge it, or you don't want to address it, or they don't do it around you, what have you. But you do. And that's a thing that people should reckon with more often than they do, because
Mm,
ignoring it just means that I get to deal with your grandfather.
yeah. Great. When you mentioned all of those things of like, they don't do it to you, they don't do it around you. Like I remember hearing all of those exact same excuses around the sexual assault stuff as well, which is there is a common way to discredit somebody who's experiencing this really poor behavior from other people. And like again, like that is like saying this in the most like gentle of ways to make sure everybody's still on board is like, yeah, of course, like it's the same tactics, it's the same playbook, it's the same kind of disregard of like, I don't want to have to deal with this. Like I don't want to talk to my buddy, I don't want to talk to my uncle, I don't want to have these hard conversations with my friends, like I never see it. Like there's a lot of excuses about why we are not engaging in these conversations, and instead and because we are not having those conversations, we kick the can down the road where it's just like, well, all right, Gray, then, we don't have the guts to deal with this or the time, or we don't understand why it's our job to be cleaning our house. And instead, we are going to make you have to deal with that. Like, as in, that is the action of people that hold an identity like mine. That is, in essence, what you're saying by not taking up action, or what I am saying when I am not taking up action is I am too scared or too busy, that instead I think you should have to deal with this when you are the most impacted
Mhm.
by this decision. Like, so I just wonder, as you are also pointing out, like, if you reframe the situation, so instead of looking at it from here, but maybe over there, like, would you engage with the situation differently if you use different words to speak about it? So
Mhm.
instead of like, oh, Gray, like, I'm so sorry that happens to you, but I am really upset that somebody like that somebody in the role of service would treat you that way. I'm going to make sure that I have a discussion about, like what are the protocols in like with the company? Like, do they know that this is happening? Do they have any, like, what are they doing on the other end? So like, how is it that we can engage in conversations in some way where it's like, you are responsible. I see your behavior and that's not tolerated. And like, we can't hold events at your space if, these conversations are not happening or you don't know how to address them, or this is an issue, or like at the West Coast swing dance, if somebody's like, that's not how that should have gone down. It's just like, well, sure, maybe not, but like who, like what steps are in place to now have that conversation so that that behavior is never repeated.
Mm-hmm.
So how are other people empowered or feel responsible to participate and not put the work on your shoulders where you're having to also deal with it?
I mean, these are really good questions, and it gets more complicated because it's so common that,
Yeah.
if a lot of times people will go, oh, well, this is kind of a personal rant. People will go, oh, this company is bad, or they did bad things, so you shouldn't buy their services. And I'm like, okay. And then there will be another company that is bad and did bad things, so you shouldn't buy their services. And then you get to the point where, as the minority lottery winner, as I have deemed it, one of them, I'm not the only one. At some point, everyone's against my interest. So then you run into the problem where you're like, well, it's not that I don't think that these people are doing bad things, but eventually I'm not going to be able to get any service, or I'm not going to be able to buy any products
Right.
without, like, there's a bit of pragmatism that I have to have that is different than other people, where they're like, oh, I'm not going to buy this because they do this thing poorly. And I'm like, well, yes, but also, so does that company, and that company, and that company hates me, and this company hates me, and this one doesn't do this thing. And I still need to buy chicken. Like, like at the end of the day,
Yeah.
I got to eat.
Right.
Which is that's kind of a side rant, but like,
No.
as a thing that people are thinking about when you are trying to decide like where you're working with or what expectations you want, there should be also a bit of pragmatism about it. And that's why I advocate towards not going like black and white in terms of
Binary.
like yes or no, but in terms of shades of gray in progress. Because ultimately, there's not going to be one day, probably in my lifetime, that I'm going to wake up and I can generally have mostly options that support me as a human being. That's probably not going to happen. And yet, I still need to eat and I still need to shop places. So these things are both true. In balancing that is a part of my life. And if people are also going to be kind of taking some of that experience on, they may also need to learn how to balance that instead of saying, oh, I just won't shop there and just not going to deal with it.
Great. Thank you for bringing so much more nuance to that part of the conversation, where it is really easy to make something black or white, or to hop into the binary of good versus bad, versus recognizing and understanding that there are, just as you said, many shades of gray. God, as I'm very much echoing. See, everybody, echo Gray's language and you're going to be okay. There's so many shades of gray. They're like, sorry, what I'm trying to say is like, it's really easy to flatten the experience and to try to simplify it just to be able to like wrap your head around an idea. But unfortunately, when there is the binary of like, they're bad, we won't talk to them, that's not where changes are going to be made, versus being able to, as you said, be pragmatic. But also, if you are on the other side of the coin where you have access to more privilege, where I would be shocked if I was treated that way in a restaurant. I also like dance around if I need something. So I mean, I make a big show of if I'm like, hi, I like need to be acknowledged right now. I know I would be shocked, but it's also just the recognition of like, how is it that I can, use what access I have to see if I can, make the world a more comfortable place for somebody else. So, like, how can we recognize when we get stuck in the binary, and how is it that we can kind of step back from that and go, it's probably more complicated than this. And at the end of the day, what is it that I can do to help make this situation more comfortable, if that question is pertinent to the situation at hand? So great. I'm also noticing that we've done a pretty epic job here in terms of talking. So I guess I have one last question for you, which would be, is there anything else you wish I had asked you, or anything else that you wish to share with on this digital meeting?
Oh, good question. Which I knew you were going to ask, but I'm like,
Yeah.
now that we've been talking, I'm like, oh, this will sound a little odd. So often, well, one, there's some pieces on my site that talk about, because we've been talking about shame and guilt and privilege. And if you've liked kind of my perspective or my writing, you may like these pieces because they kind of approach it from a very different angle. And I kept wanting to be like, I have feelings, but I'm like, yes, they're on the site. You should go look. But one thing I will say is, a lot of when these conversations come up, a lot of us get an influx of people in our inbox, of various types and needs, but usually it's the unspoken thing is, I need you to tell me that it's okay, or that I'm okay.
Yeah.
I don't know a single Black person that likes this. So my general rule I give people is, if you have not gone out to dinner with this person, or like spent time with them as a person,
Yeah.
don't message them. Don't do it. Just like, because either you care about them as a person, and therefore you care about them as a person who happens to be Black, or you should look at why you're messaging them. Because there's nothing you're going to say in our inbox that is impactful to us. So like when I get messages, or had, like when 2020 was going and BLM came back around, and people very sweetly were like, hey, this is really messed up. And I'm like, and they're like, I just don't know what to do. I can't, I'm just so shocked. And I'm like, wow, this is just like, and I'm like, I don't know what to say to you. Like,
welcome to the party.
I'm like, I appreciate that you're having this moment, and like, I'm glad you're here, but also, or people that I don't know very well being like, well, how are you doing? And I'm like, I'm not gonna tell you. I don't know you. Like, I don't know you. Like, you're just a dancer. And like, I appreciate the sentiment, but like, you're not checking on me as a friend. You're checking on me as that Black person you feel bad for. And I don't want that. I don't want that. Most of us don't want that, from what I've been told, at least. And I'm bringing this up because I think as the scene moves forward, there's an importance of not only hearing Black voices, but not fetishizing or tokenizing Black voices either. And if you're not sure if you're doing it, you probably need to slow down. Because you either know or you don't. You either can make a line is, if you have a joke that's slightly rude, and it's around race, or around like a racial experience, for example, and you're not sure if you should say it, you shouldn't say it. Because either that's disrespectful, it's too far, or you don't have the rapport with this person enough to make that type of joke. And this applies to any emotional request, or any desires for connection in this way, or like asking a person to do labor or work, is if you haven't made that rapport, if you're not sure if you're supposed to say this or allowed to say this, you might need to do some more background work before you're really ready to do that.
Mm.
And maybe that's instead of being in my inbox like, "Oh my god, I saw the news." It's like, you send me a meme once a week. Or like we go to the dance and you say, "Hi, let's dance." And then you ask the other Black people, particularly Black women in the room who are being ignored, that they should dance or you want to dance with them. And that is going to be way more impactful and appropriate than like showing up in our inboxes and being like, "I'm so sorry. I just," and I'm like, "I please don't give me this. I don't want this." Like, I appreciate the gesture. I see the genuineness behind it, but um, people tend not to realize what that experience is like for us on our
Mm.
side.
Yeah.
Um, and I have a whole piece about it says like called out now what, and
Yeah.
one of the bits in it is like if you're cooking for a friend and they say, they don't like lima beans. I hate lima beans. And they say, and you cook and it has lima beans you forgot, and you make it and then you give it to them, and they're like, do I eat around the lima beans? Do I like say anything? And they've summoned the energy to tell you and the vulnerability to be like, hey, I appreciate this. I hate lima beans. Please, like, let's not do this. Let's not do this in the future. I don't want this.
Mhm.
You know, you have a couple options. You can scream at your friend and tell them, I made this for you. I tried so hard. How dare you not like my food? That doesn't fix the problem. You can go, well, can't you pick around them? Also doesn't fix the problem. But really, you can start sobbing and being like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I can't believe I put lima beans in this. I'm such a terrible person. Blah, 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 blah. And like all of these reactions put a lot of work on the other person who's just like, can we just order pizza and move on with the night? And that is what matters.
Yeah.
And being able to do that and to say that and then make a decision about in the future, how are you going to avoid cooking with lima beans for this person? And either that means you can then learn some new recipes, go out there, figure it out, or you can continue to buy food, and that's an option. But whatever you do, not putting it back on the other person of like, I just never going to cook for you again. You're just so hard to cook for. I can't. Uh, I tried so hard and I worked so hard and just, you know,
Oh, you're bringing me back to some old relationships. It's just like, that's not the point. That's not the fucking point. That's what you chose to listen to. That's what you heard. Oh, what a moment for connection. And like, what a moment where trust was not built. Oh, God. Wow.
it's exactly that where you're like, the thing I want is for us to continue with our night. It was not that big of a thing. And even if
Right.
it was, it like doesn't need to be bigger than it is. And
Totally.
then it's suddenly like this huge thing that
Yeah.
you don't want. And you're like, no, why?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I desire for us to have an honest relationship where if there's a mistake that I can say it and it doesn't ruin the evening, instead it's acknowledged and that we move forward together in a way that we can still enjoy our time.
exactly. Because mistakes are going to happen. This is going to be a learning process. It's going to be messy. Things are going to happen that aren't ideal, that end up somewhere in the gray area of things. And that's just a thing that's going to happen. And people, a lot of times white folks are raised to not be okay with that as a concept.
Yeah.
But you're going to have to get used to it because it's going to happen. And not everyone is going to be nice about it all the time. Like sometimes people are going to be tired or they're going to be kind of done. And that is not a reflection of you being bad. You just did a bad thing.
Mm.
And I think that's a very important distinction that will allow people to give themselves a bit of grace
Mm.
and also to not end up in that weird defensive place where you're like, oh, I'm just not going to deal with it at all then because I just don't. And it's like, no, no, no. Like, don't get me wrong. Some people who have issues with race or struggle or make mistakes, could be better people. But in general, I find most people are not intentionally trying to be bad people. They just were doing a bad action. It's what you do next that actually matters.
Snaps for that. Gray, do you offer coaching sessions? I feel like we just did a coaching session for the world. I mean, like, I know that we've kind of done stuff like this as well, and like this is like what coaching looks like. So you can answer that privately or later, and we can make an announcement.
Honestly, my coach is trying to get me to consider going into coaching at some point. I have, as of this point, considered this to be more like this part of the dynamic, to be more of an extension of consulting, which I do do. Although I have not done a lot of like formal coaching necessarily. But
well, then let me use some different language. So, Gray, does this mean people could hire you to do consulting work for them?
Yes, it does.
Oh, fabulous. What would be the best way for people to contact you so that they could hire you to consult with them about some of these issues that might be facing them or their organization?
Yes. So the best way to contact me is through email. I would suggest obsidiant@gmail.com is the best way. And if you happen to use one of my other emails, they all come to the same place, but like that would be my preference. Please do not message me on Facebook. I will never find your message again. And if you're not sure, you can message the Obsidian page, and then it will show you an email address. So if you forget where the email is, message that, not my personal account, because I'm gonna stress out.
We'll put all of that in, I guess, like the show notes later. And it sounds like Gray will also have maybe like 5 or 6 links for some of the other blog posts you've done previously, just to make sure that everybody can find them really easily.
Yes.
And so an hour and a half, Gray. I'm shocked, but not shocked, because talking with you is always so easy and so fun and so exciting. And I always feel so impassioned, like after we've had this conversation of like, oh, I need to talk with people about lima beans, and just like rip roar around. But otherwise, Gray, thank you so very much for your time and for writing this article and doing so much research. And after all of this time, still being so gracious with your time and energy to invest in the Lindy Hop community so that it becomes a better, happier, healthier place for so many more people. I just really, really appreciate getting to be in conversation with you, and for you to have also just been such an excellent mentor to me and iLindy, helping us like see in places where we have been lacking as a company, as a group, in ways that we can learn to see past the things that we have just not had our eyes open to.
Yeah, I'm so grateful to be here. And honestly, I love Lindy Hop. I have some issues with some of the scene, and I have some, not concerns, but more just like some differences in opinion in terms of like some of the physicality of some of the dance, which we could talk about sometime. But like, but I do love this dance, and this dance and blues was a way for me to connect to my heritage and connect to the memory of my grandfather, which is really important to me. And so, I don't know. I'm not gonna cry. And so,
Yeah.
and so it means a lot. And so I'm excited to be hopefully adding to this conversation that people have been having for a very long time, and giving voice to some people who might not have wanted to be publicly giving their experiences. And then I'm very, very excited about the next piece. Like, it is one of my favorites of the series. It's all about the history. Like, the main question is, how did we get here? How did we get here?
How did we get here?
It's a fascinating history, and it's from the perspective of doing an oral history, of focusing on firsthand and secondary accounts versus just hearing kind of the same myths spoken over and over again. And some of those get busted and some of those get discussed in more nuance. And it's a really interesting story. And I hope people read it. It's long, but it is good.
Yeah.
Uh, so I'm so excited to see what conversations come out of that.
So excited. Gray, you're so fun. All right. Well, Gray, thank you for your time. We'll make sure that all of the show notes are together. And then otherwise, maybe we'll get to have another conversation after the next article comes out so that we can be like, all right, so how did we get here, people? And then
Yeah.
maybe I can have a glass of tea with me or maybe a beer. It might need to be one of those beer conversations.
I think so. Judging by what I know is it's a lot in the piece. There's a bit of heaviness in there too, but I try to keep it. Um, I try not to let people drown too much in some of the grief in it, and just
Yeah.
kind of be excited for the piece as it happens. So
Yeah.
yeah, I probably will have a drink too. It'll be nice. I've been just having coffee. I just have cold brew. It's nothing
I
exciting.
whatever it is that kind of keeps the jolt going. All right. Well, Gray, thank you so much for your time. And I can't wait to see what comes of all of this and what conversations happen afterwards.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.